Snowflakes drifted across the Langston estate like tiny shards of glass. A black woman stood at the edge of the frozen lawn, breath sharp, eyes locked on the two masked men closing in. One of them raised a gun toward the little girl, clutching her teddy bear. "Move now," Maya shouted, voice slicing through the wind. She lunged forward, wrapping her arms around the trembling child just as the gun fired. The shot cracked through the stillness. Bark exploded off a nearby tree, inches from her head. The girl screamed. Maya turned her body, shielding her like armor. "Run, Evelyn. Run to the trees," she cried, pushing the child behind her. For a second, everything froze, the snow, the sound, even the air. Then Maya moved, fast, calculated, controlled. She pivoted, grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisted until the gun clattered into the snow. The second man lunged, swinging a baton. Maya ducked low, drove her elbow into his ribs, then swept his legs from under him. They hit the ground hard, both disarmed before they even understood who they were up against. Silence. Only Evelyn's ragged breathing cut through it. The child pressed against Maya's coat, her tiny hands shaking. "It's okay, baby," Maya whispered, eyes scanning the yard. "I've got you." If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. Red and blue lights suddenly flashed in the distance, security vehicles tearing up the driveway. Maya raised her hand slowly as guards jumped out with rifles. "She's a nanny," one shouted. "Put the guns down." The first officer approached, breathing hard. "You took down both of them?" Maya nodded once, her voice steady. "They came for her. I didn't give them the chance." Behind her, tires screeched over gravel. A sleek black Range Rover slid to a stop. The door flew open and out stepped Richard Langston, billionaire, father, man of power. But right now, he looked nothing like the headlines. His face was pale, terrified, desperate. "Where's my daughter?" he yelled. "She's safe," one guard said quickly, guiding him forward. Miss Williams protected her. Richard's eyes locked on the sight ahead, his daughter clinging to Maya, sobbing silently into her coat. The billionaire froze. Evelyn didn't run to him. She held tighter to the nanny. "Maya," Richard's voice cracked. Maya turned, her temple bleeding, snow melting off her sleeves. "She's okay," she said softly. But they weren't amateurs. He looked at the two unconscious men lying in the snow. One had a broken wrist, the other bruised ribs, both stripped of weapons. Richard exhaled, disbelief written across his face. "How did you—" "I used to train for situations like this," she interrupted. "Not like this exactly, but close enough." Paramedics rushed past them, checking the child. Evelyn refused to let go. Richard crouched beside her, reaching out. "Sweetheart, you're okay now. Daddy's here." But she shook her head violently. "No, only Maya." The words hit harder than the gunshot had. The billionaire's hand hung in midair, unsure, rejected. Maya crouched to meet the girl's eyes. "It's okay, honey. You can trust your dad." But Evelyn just buried her face deeper into Maya's chest. A medic stepped closer. "Miss, you're bleeding." "I'm fine," Maya said quickly. Her knuckles ached, but she hid them inside her coat pocket. Richard stood slowly, his gaze fixed on her. There was confusion in his voice, and something else he couldn't name. "You risked your life for her." Maya met his eyes. "That's my job." He hesitated. "That's not in the job description I signed." Maya half smiled. "Maybe you hired the wrong woman." Security officers loaded the unconscious attackers into the truck. As they drove off, Richard looked around the frozen yard. The bullet hole in the oak tree, the shattered glass, the snow soaked in red. He turned back to Maya. "I owe you more than I can say." "You don't owe me," she said quietly. "Just keep her safe." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but Evelyn suddenly reached for Maya's hand again, gripping it tight. The billionaire paused, watching the two of them framed in the blue glow of the security lights. He'd built empires, crushed rivals, controlled everything around him. But in this moment, he realized Control meant nothing compared to courage standing before him. The wind howled across the estate. Maya looked down at Evelyn, brushing snow from her hair. "It's over," she whispered. "You're safe now." But her eyes told a different story, the kind that knows danger doesn't end when the sirens stop. The marble hallway of Langston Manor smelled of burnt coffee and fear. Police radios hissed, cameras flashed, and the storm outside had turned the windows white. Maya sat on the edge of a velvet couch, still in her torn coat, hands trembling inside her pockets. Across from her, a white security officer whispered to another, "Did you see how she took them down?" Like a soldier. The man beside him smirked. "Yeah, or maybe she was part of it." Maya looked up. "You could ask me instead of whispering." They froze. One coughed, looking away. Before the tension could settle, Richard Langston stepped in. His tailored coat was gone. He wore just a black sweater and a face carved with exhaustion. "Everyone out," he said quietly. "Now." The guards hesitated, then scattered. Only the billionaire and the nanny remained. He studied her for a long moment. "You're hurt. I've had worse. You didn't tell me you were trained. You didn't ask." He exhaled slowly, lowering himself into the chair opposite hers. "For what it's worth," he said, voice rough, "you saved my daughter's life. That's not something I can repay." "I didn't do it for repayment," Maya answered. "She's just a child." A long pause filled the room, the kind that stretches when two people realize the world isn't what it looked like an hour ago. Richard rubbed the bridge of his nose. "The police are handling the scene, but they're going to want your statement." "I already gave it." "I mean about you." She frowned. "What about me?" He hesitated. "The officer in charge. He asked if you have a record. Said the attackers might have known you." Maya's jaw tightened. "Because I'm black, right? Must be part of it." "That's not what Then what is it, Mr. Langston?" "Because when a white nanny saves a child, she's called a hero. When I do it, I'm an investigation." Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had built companies that answered to him, but he couldn't answer her. Finally, he said softly, "You're right." Maya stood. "I know I am." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Maya." She turned halfway. "I need to understand who you are, not because I doubt you, but because I owe you my child's life. Let me do this right." For the first time, something softened in her expression. "Then start by believing what you saw." "I do." "Good." She walked toward the grand staircase, pausing near the doorway as a little girl appeared in pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Evelyn," Richard said, rushing forward. "You should be in bed." But the child ran straight to Maya and clung to her leg. "It's okay, sweetheart," Maya whispered. "You're safe now." "Will they come back?" the child asked, voice small. Maya bent to her level. "Not while I'm here." The words hit Richard harder than any gunshot could. He watched his daughter bury her face in the woman's coat, the same coat that still had blood on it, and he felt something break inside him. After Evelyn fell asleep, he found Maya in the kitchen making tea with one good hand. The quiet felt heavier than the snow outside. He leaned against the counter. "Do you always stay this calm after gunfire?" Maya didn't look up. "You learn to breathe through chaos. Otherwise, it owns you." "Military?" he asked. "Something like that." He nodded slowly. "You know, people pay millions for bodyguards who wouldn't last half as long as you did today. I'm not a bodyguard." He smiled faintly. Could have fooled everyone out there. She finally met his gaze. "Mr. Langston, whatever happened today, it's not over. Those men weren't random." He frowned. "You think they were hired?" "I think someone knew exactly when you'd be gone and when your daughter would be outside." "You're saying this was planned." "I'm saying it was personal." Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, face paling. "It's the news. They already have the story." "Of course they do," Maya muttered. "They always show up faster than the truth." He silenced the call, then looked at her again. "The world will twist this, Maya. They'll say whatever sells." She shrugged. "Let them talk." I don't do this for headlines. What do you do it for? She hesitated, then said quietly, because someone once needed saving and nobody showed up. The words hung in the air, raw and real. Richard didn't ask more. For now, he just nodded, watching her pour 2 cups of tea like nothing had happened. Outside, sirens faded into the distance, and snow began to fall again, quiet, relentless, erasing footprints but not memories. Maya looked through the window, voice barely above a whisper. People think danger ends when police arrive. It doesn't. It waits. Richard followed her gaze to his daughter, sleeping upstairs. He realized she wasn't just talking about kidnappers. She was talking about something deeper, something that had followed her long before she worked for him. The clock ticked. The mansion stood silent, except for the faint hiss of wind through the glass. And for the first time that night, Richard Langston, billionaire, mogul, man who owned half of Wyoming, felt completely powerless. The next morning, sunlight barely touched the Langston estate. News vans lined the private road, like vultures waiting for movement. Inside, the marble hall had turned into oppressive uniforms and quiet suspicion. Maya sat at the long mahogany table in the security office. Her bandaged hand rested on a glass of untouched water. Across from her, a white man in a navy suit flipped through papers with deliberate slowness, the kind of rhythm that meant judgment was coming. "Miss Williams," he began, voice flat, "we appreciate your bravery." She raised an eyebrow. "You sound thrilled about it." He looked up, eyes sharp. "I'm head of legal for the Langston Group. My job is to protect this family's reputation. You understand?" "I understand you're not thanking me. I'm asking questions," he said, "because there are gaps here." He leaned forward. "You were hired 6 months ago. No record beyond basic nanny experience. No extended references from your previous post. And conveniently, you're the only one who wasn't accounted for during the attack." Maya's jaw tightened. "You think I staged it?" He gave a thin smile. "I think you're remarkably prepared. Hand-to-hand combat, tactical awareness. Most nannies don't disarm men with guns. I'm not most nannies." I noticed. The door opened. Richard stepped in, his voice low but firm. "That's enough." "Sir, I'm just doing my job." "No," Richard said. "You're insulting the one person who saved my child." The lawyer looked from him to Maya. "Mr. Langston, we both know perception matters. The media already has footage of a black woman fighting 2 white men on your property. You want that kind of headline." Richard's eyes hardened. "What I want is the truth." Maya stood slowly. "No, let him finish. I want to hear what he really means." The lawyer hesitated. "Go ahead," she said, voice calm but dangerous. "Say what you're thinking." He straightened his tie. "People like you." Maya cut him off, stepping forward. "People like me what?" Her voice dropped lower, colder. "Say it. Because people like me don't freeze when things get ugly. People like me save your children while you write reports." The man's face reddened. "Watch your tone." "You're welcome to try and change it," she said, stepping closer. "But you'll lose that too." Richard intervened, hand raised. "Both of you enough." He looked directly at the lawyer. "You're dismissed." "But sir," I said, dismissed. The man gathered his files and stormed out. Silence filled the room again, thick, uncomfortable, powerful. Richard turned to her. "You didn't have to bite back like that." She looked at him. "If I don't, they'll think they can walk over me. You've seen how fast respect disappears when your skin doesn't fit the wallpaper." He opened his mouth, then stopped, because she was right. She picked up her coat. "Are we done?" "For now," he said. She nodded. "Good." As she reached the door, Richard said softly, "You really think it was personal, don't you?" "I know it was." Her voice carried the kind of certainty that comes from scars, not guesses. Richard leaned against the wall, watching her leave. When the door closed, he looked down at his trembling hands. It had been years since he'd felt afraid in his own house. Later that evening, the mansion felt too quiet. Evelyn sat on the carpet, drawing in crayon, her small world full of pink clouds and stick figures. Maya knelt beside her, careful not to disturb the rhythm. "Who's that?" she asked gently. Evelyn smiled. "That's you. And this? That's me. You're holding my hand so the bad guys can't find me." Maya's throat tightened. "Looks perfect, sweetheart." The little girl's smile faded. "Will they come back?" "No," Maya said softly. "They'll never come near you again." Evelyn leaned her head against Maya's arm. "You promise?" "With my life." Richard watched from the doorway, unnoticed, thoughtful. He saw something he hadn't seen in years. His daughter at peace, not because of wealth or walls, but because of the woman beside her. After Evelyn went to bed, Maya stepped into the hallway. Richard was waiting. "I heard the board wants to suspend me," she said without emotion. "They're scared," he replied. Rich people mistake fear for strategy. They also mistake silence for safety. He sighed. "You're not wrong." Maya looked out at the dark courtyard. The men who came yesterday, they weren't here for ransom. This was a message. From who? I don't know, but they weren't amateurs. And whoever sent them isn't done. Richard studied her face. Calm, confident, unreadable. "What are you planning to do?" She glanced at him. "My job." The snow outside had stopped falling, but the air still carried the weight of something unfinished. Something bigger than either of them yet. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. That evening, the snow had stopped, but the silence inside the mansion was heavier than ever. Maya stood near the kitchen window, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. She'd changed out her blood-stained coat, but the memories clung harder than fabric ever could. Footsteps echoed behind her. Richard entered quietly, sleeves rolled up, no longer looking like the man who owned $100 million contracts. He looked like a father who hadn't slept in days. "They left," he said softly. "Police, media, everyone." Finally, Maya replied, "I told them you're staying here tonight. My staff will keep their mouths shut." She gave a faint smile. "Good luck with that. You pay them too well." Richard hesitated. "I can't stop thinking about what you said earlier, that it was personal." "It was," she said. "You sound certain." "I am, because fear looks different when it's planned. Those men didn't panic, they executed." He moved closer, watching her reflection in the glass. "How do you know that?" Maya looked down at her hands. "Because that's how I used to move." Richard turned. "Used to? I wasn't always a nanny, Mr. Langston." She set the mug down, the clink echoing in the stillness. "I served 6 years. Tactical response unit. Left after Afghanistan." "Why?" "Because I learned medals don't stop nightmares, and orders don't erase blood." He exhaled slowly. "You never told me. You never asked." For a long second, the only sound was a clock ticking between them. Then he said quietly, "You saved my daughter's life twice now. Once yesterday and once right now, by being honest." Maya gave a small shrug. "Truth doesn't change much." "It changes everything," he said. "At least for me." He pulled something from his pocket, a small flash drive. "Security team found this in the gate recorder," he said. "It was hidden under corrupted footage." Maya frowned. "What's on it?" "See for yourself." He plugged it into the laptop on the counter. Static flickered, then the footage stabilized. 2 men in black stepped out of a delivery van, the same attackers. But behind them, for a split second, another face appeared, no mask, no disguise. A woman, adjusting her scarf. Maya leaned closer. "Wait!" Pause there. Richard froze the frame. The woman was white, mid-30s, blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears. Something about her face made his hand tremble. He zoomed in. "Richard?" Maya asked softly. His lips moved, barely forming a word. "Rebecca?" Maya blinked. "Your wife?" He nodded slowly. "My dead wife." The silence was deafening. Maya straightened, her expression unreadable. "You're sure?" "I buried her 3 years ago." "Then who the hell was that?" He rubbed his forehead. Her car went off a cliff in Nevada. They never found the body. Police called it an accident. Maya stared at the pause frame. That's no accident. That's a message. Richard turned toward her. You think she sent them? I think she's telling you something. Then why target Evelyn? Maybe you weren't the message. Maybe she was. They both stared at the frozen image. Rebecca Langston, alive, watching, waiting. The air grew cold again. Maya closed the laptop. If she's alive, she's either running from something or she's coming back for something. Richard whispered, Our daughter. Maya's eyes narrowed. Then we don't wait for her to knock. He nodded slowly. What do you need? A list of anyone who knew your family back then. Friends, employees, investors, even enemies. You think someone else is involved? I think no one vanishes alone, and no one reappears without a reason. Richard's phone buzzed on the counter. The screen flashed a single text from an unknown number. Stop looking for ghosts. Maya picked up the phone, reading it over his shoulder. Too late, she said. The ghosts are already watching us. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Not employer and employee, not billionaire and nanny, but two people standing at the edge of something dangerous and unfinished. The storm outside began again, wind pressing against the glass like a warning. Evelyn's laughter echoed faintly upstairs. Innocent, unaware, Maya turned toward the stairs. Keep the doors locked. No staff leaves, no one enters. And you? Richard asked. I'll be watching. She walked down the hallway. Every step steady, silent, deliberate. The light from the chandelier caught her face. Calm, focused, ready. Richard watched her disappear into the shadows and whispered to himself, She's not a nanny. She's a storm I never saw coming. The night pressed heavy over the mountains. Wind hissed through the cracks of the old Langston mansion, whispering like it carried secrets. Maya couldn't sleep. She stood on the balcony, coat wrapped tight, watching snow drift across the courtyard. Her eyes weren't really seeing the snow. They were seeing something 12 years old, something she'd spent half a lifetime trying to bury. Behind her, the door creaked. Richard stepped out quietly, a blanket over his shoulders. You're awake too, he said. Sleep's a privilege, Maya murmured. Some of us lose the right to it. He leaned on the railing beside her. I keep thinking about that footage about her face. I buried her, Maya. I held a funeral. You buried a body that was never found, she said softly. Closure built on a lie never lasts. He looked at her. How do you live with that kind of uncertainty? Maya's voice cracked for the first time. You don't. You just survive around it. Richard studied her, realizing for the first time that beneath her steel was something cracked, bleeding. He said carefully, You've seen too much to just be a nanny. She gave a sad smile. Everyone's got before and after, Mr. Langston. Mine started with a scream. She turned toward the darkness beyond the railing. I was 16 when my little sister, Jasmine, went missing. We were walking home from school, 2 miles, same route every day. I stopped at the corner store to grab milk. She kept walking. Her breath trembled. I never saw her again. Richard didn't speak. He just listened. The police said she was probably a runaway, Maya continued. They always say that about girls who look like us. But I found her shoe half a mile down the road. And still, they called it coincidence. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't blink. That was the day I decided if help wouldn't come for people like Jasmine, I'd become the kind of person who didn't wait for help. Richard's throat tightened. So you joined the military? Yeah, thought it would teach me control. Instead, it just taught me different kinds of loss. She looked away. When I saw those men grab your daughter, I didn't see Evelyn. I saw Jasmine, and I swore I'd never fail again. The wind howled, rattling the glass. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Richard said quietly, You shouldn't have to carry that alone. I don't, she said. I carried her with me. Every time I protect a child, I hear her voice saying, Thank you. He nodded slowly, emotion rising in his chest. Then he hesitated. Maya, there's something else you should know. She looked at him. When Rebecca was alive, she volunteered with a private foundation, It helped fund research for missing children, girls taken between 2006 and 2012. Maya's eyes flickered. That's the same window Jasmine disappeared in. Yes, and guess where that foundation was based? Where? Nevada. The silence turned sharp. Maya stepped closer. You think your wife's project was connected? I think she knew things she never told me. He pulled open a drawer on the side table, handing her a small photograph. Rebecca stood beside a group of children, all smiling. In the back, a girl barely 12, brown skin, big eyes, and braids. Maya's breath caught. That looks like Jasmine. Richard nodded grimly. This was taken 2 months before Rebecca's accident. Maya sank into the chair, holding the photo like a relic. She was alive. She was right there. Her voice broke for the first time. And no one told me. Richard knelt beside her. We'll find out the truth. I promise you. Maya shook her head slowly. Don't promise me justice, Mr. Langston. Promise me you won't stop when it gets ugly. I won't, he said. You have my word. She wiped her eyes, straightened up. Then we start tonight. How? By following her money. Foundations like that don't die, they just change names. She stood, gripping the photo tightly. For 12 years, I thought I lost my sister to the dark. Maybe I just lost her to people hiding inside the light. Richard watched her walk back inside, purpose burning through her exhaustion. The woman who'd once been his nanny was gone, replaced by something unstoppable. As the door closed behind her, he whispered to himself, Rebecca, what the hell did you get us into? Snow kept falling, silent and endless, covering the footprints that led nowhere, but the truth had already begun to thaw. A storm gathered over the valley by morning. Wind slammed against the mansion windows, making the chandeliers tremble like nerves. Richard sat at the study desk, scrolling through encrypted files, his eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. Across the room, Maya sorted through printed records, foundation names, donor lists, offshore accounts. She circled one line with a red pen. Project Jasmine, she read aloud. Richard's head snapped up. What did you say? She slid the paper toward him. Project Jasmine, founded 2012, dissolved 2 months before your wife's accident. He stared at the name. That's not a coincidence. No, she said. It's a confession hidden in plain sight. Before they could say more, the intercom buzzed. Security voice crackled. Sir, we have a delivery. No driver, just a courier van. Box left at the gate. Maya and Richard exchanged a look. Minutes later, the box sat on the table. Plain brown, no label. Maya sliced the tape carefully with a kitchen knife. Inside was a single black phone, screen glowing before she even touched it. Richard frowned. It's already on? The screen lit up. Incoming video call. Maya's hand hovered over the device. Who the hell? The feed connected automatically. A woman's face filled the screen. Blonde hair. Calm eyes. Rebecca Langston. Richard's breath vanished. Rebecca? The woman smiled faintly. Hello, Richard. His hand trembled. You're alive. I was, until you buried me. Maya stepped forward. Where's your daughter? Rebecca's eyes flicked toward her. Ah, the protector. I've seen your work. Then you know I'm not here for introductions. Rebecca chuckled softly, still the soldier. You were harder to find than I thought, Maya Williams. Maya froze. You know my name? Of course I do. You and I have met before. You just don't remember. Richard stared between them. What are you talking about? Rebecca tilted her head. Your nanny was one of our early candidates. Project Jasmine. She was meant to protect something bigger than this family. Until she walked away. Maya's heart pounded. You experimented on children. Rebecca's voice stayed calm. We trained them. Enhanced their perception, their obedience. You call it exploitation. I call it progress. You use girls like my sister. Maya's voice broke through the static. What did you do to her? Rebecca's eyes softened, almost kindly. Your sister was special, Maya. She learned faster than any of them, but emotion made her weak, just like you. Maya slammed her fist on the table. Where is she? Rebecca smiled faintly. Closer than you think. The screen flickered, distorted, then cut to black. Richard stood frozen, voice shaking. What the hell was that? Maya stared at the blank phone screen. A threat. The device beeped. One final message appeared. You shouldn't have brought her here. Tell Richard he was never supposed to see me again. The message deleted itself instantly. Maya whispered, self-erasing. Whoever she's working with has tech far beyond the Langston firm. Richard pressed his hands to his face. I don't even recognize my own wife anymore. She's not your wife now, Maya said. She's your enemy. Thunder rattled the walls. Maya paced the room, thinking fast. She knows your routines, your security codes, your weaknesses. She won't stop at messages. She's coming. Richard's voice cracked. What does she want? She told you weren't supposed to see her again. That means you know something you're not supposed to. He looked at the photo still lying on the desk, the one of Rebecca standing beside Jasmine. Maya followed his gaze. You think my sister was part of a project? She might still be. Her voice dropped low. If Jasmine's alive, I'm getting her back. Richard nodded. Then we do this together. Maya hesitated. You sure you're ready for that? He met her eyes. You saved my daughter. Let me save what's left of yours. Lightning flashed through the windows, painting the room white for a heartbeat. Maya looked out into the storm. She's watching us, she said quietly, and she's waiting for us to make a move. Then let's not keep her waiting, Richard replied. She turned back toward him. Pack a bag. We're leaving tonight. Where to? The safe house in the mountains. If she wants to play God, we'll make her come down from heaven herself. As she unplugged the phone and stuffed it into her jacket, Evelyn's small voice echoed from the hallway, sleepy and scared. Miss Maya, why are you leaving? Maya knelt, forcing a smile. We're just going on a trip, baby girl. Somewhere safe. Will Mommy come? Maya's heart clenched. She looked at Richard, then whispered. She already did. The sky was turning gray when the first light touched the mountain safe house. Snow glittered like glass over the roof, and smoke curled from the chimney, the kind that said someone was already inside. Maya's instincts went sharp. She motioned for Richard to stay behind her. Gun raised, stepped soundless against the frozen wood. Inside, a single candle flickered on the table, and beside it lay a photograph, the same one of Rebecca and Jasmine, now torn in half. A voice came from the shadows. You were always meant to finish what I started. Maya turned. Rebecca Langston stepped into the light. Alive, pale, eyes too calm belonged to someone human. Richard froze at the door. Rebecca, she smiled. You finally found me. You staged your death? I liberated myself, she said simply. From this family, from the system, from men who think money makes them gods. Maya took a step forward. You experimented on children, including my sister. Rebecca's smile faded. I gave them purpose. You call it control. I call it order. You called it Project Jasmine. Maya said coldly. Tell me where she is. Rebecca tilted her head. She's gone, Maya. Because of you. Maya's grip tightened on the gun. Don't lie. I'm not, Rebecca whispered. You were our first prototype. Jasmine was the second. Maya's breath caught. She admired you so much she copied everything, even your defiance. When you escaped, she tried to follow. The others made sure she didn't. Maya's voice trembled. You murdered her. Rebecca's gaze softened, almost sad. I perfected you. Richard stepped forward. Enough. He moved between them. Whatever this is, it ends now. Rebecca looked at him with something almost like pity. You never understood what I was doing for us, Richard. Power isn't in money, it's in control. I don't need control, he said quietly. I need my family back. Rebecca's smile vanished. Then you'll die with them. She reached for a hidden trigger beneath the desk, but Maya was faster. A single shot cracked the stillness. The bullet shattered the device in her hand, sparks flying. Rebecca staggered back, eyes wide, then laughed softly through the smoke. "You really did learn, didn't you?" Maya kept the gun steady. "Better than you taught me." Outside, sirens echoed up the mountain. Local police, helicopters in the distance. Rebecca backed toward the window. "They'll never believe your story. The world protects people like me." "Maybe," Maya said, lowering the gun, "but not today." Rebecca's heel hit the edge of the table. She slipped, glass shattering as she fell backward through the window. Snow swallowed her scream. Silence. Only wind filled the space where she had stood. Maya didn't move. Richard stared at the shattered glass. "Is she?" "She's gone," Maya said softly. "For real this time." The sirens grew closer. Maya turned to him. "You should tell them everything, the foundation, the files, the money trail." "I will." She glanced outside. She built a system that used people like weapons. Maybe now the world will finally see it. Richard nodded, eyes wet. "What will you do?" She looked toward the snow-covered trees. "Find the others. If they made more girls like us, they deserve a chance to be free." He stepped closer. "You saved my daughter, Maya. You saved me." She met his eyes, calm, steady. "I don't save people. I remind them what courage looks like." He smiled faintly, then promised me something. "What?" "Come back one day. Evelyn still needs you." Maya looked out at the dawn, sunlight cutting through the gray. "She doesn't need a soldier anymore," she said. "She needs a childhood." She holstered the gun, picked up her bag, and walked toward the door. Richard watched her leave, the rising sun painting her figure gold. As she disappeared down the snowy path, he whispered, "She didn't save my daughter for money. She saved what was left of my soul." If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.